Hello, this is Mira Nakashima. I am the daughter of George Nakashima, who was my father and was incarcerated with us in Minidoka in 1942. This is a picture of him when he is sitting in front of the arts building on our property. He was born in 1905. He went to University of Washington in forestry and then architecture, and he passed away in 1990 after a long and illustrious career. This is a picture of my father on the left-hand side for his first birthday, probably, in his Japanese formal kimono, and the photograph on the right is his graduation picture when he graduated from University of Washington in 1929. He did so well in architecture that he won a scholarship to the École des Beaux-Arts out of Paris at Fontainebleau, and he spent the summer there and then got a scholarship to Harvard University. And he decided he didn't like Harvard and transferred to MIT, where he graduated with a master's in architecture in 1930. This is one of his master's drawings that he did, showing that he learned quite a bit when he was in France at the École des Beaux-Arts. It's one of those beautiful big hand drawings that's done in ink and pencil and charcoal and gouache and watercolor, and is quite beautiful. We have it sometimes hanging down in the arts building on our property. I believe this is the one that has a cryptic little inscription in the lower right-hand corner that says, "I am an American." It was an international competition, which is why he had to make that designation that he was an American. He was not a Japanese. But when he graduated in 1930, there wasn't much work to do, so he sold his car and bought a steamship ticket around the world, bummed around Paris again for a while, and eventually ended up in Tokyo, the land of his ancestors. And his father said, "I think it's about time you got a real job." So he landed a job with Antonin Raymond, who is one of the really important architects in the 20th century, especially in Japan. He brought the technology from Europe and the United States of reinforced concrete to Japan, and he worked with several very important architects of the 20th century. Antonin Raymond himself was a Czech architect, educated in Czechoslovakia, and his wife Noemi is from Paris, and they came to the United States and opened actually he studied with Frank Lloyd Wright in 1916 and was asked by Mr. Wright to go to help him in Tokyo on the Imperial Hotel. So he started his own office there as soon as the project with Wright was finished. And the person on the lower right-hand corner is Junzo Yoshimura, who was my father's best friend at the time, taught him a lot about traditional Japanese architecture. My father is in the center row in the back. This is one of the projects that my father did when he was with the Raymond office. It's a little church, a Catholic church that was built all of wood, harvested from the property itself, and of stone that was harvested from the property itself in Karuizawa, Japan, outside of Tokyo. And it became a landmark, architectural landmark, and is still in full use to this day. It's been renovated a few times, but it still is a monument to the creativity of Antonin Raymond's office and my father's working with the Japanese daiku, the carpenters. This is a project that my father did with the Raymond office. In 1936, he was sent to India to supervise the first reinforced concrete building built there. It was a very interesting concept because India, South India, particularly, it's in Pondicherry, is very hot. And there wasn't any air conditioning at the time. So my Mr. Raymond designed louvers that would be on both the north and south sides of the building that would allow the air to pass freely from the one side of the room to the other, and to keep them fairly cool. It's still in perfect condition to this day. It has been in continuous use since 1936 when it was built, and it has become one of the important landmarks in architecture in India. And in 1938, my father became a disciple of Sri Aurobindo and took on the name Sundarananda, and thought he was going to stay there for the rest of his life because he really was taken with the philosophy and with the culture of the Sri Aurobindo community. But the war broke out, so he decided he would have to come back to the United States to join his family. By chance, he met my mother in Tokyo on the way back. She was visiting her sister in Australia and staying with another sister who lived in Tokyo. They were both brought up in Seattle, and their families apparently knew each other, but they didn't know each other. My mother was the youngest of her family. My father was the oldest of his. So the brothers in between knew each other, but they had never met till they got to Tokyo, and they fell in love, became engaged, and were married in Los Angeles in 1941. I was born a year later, and we were incarcerated a year later. And the picture on the right here is my mother's father, Kinyo Kajima, who came with us to camp, and they're holding me probably on our doorstep as we're getting ready to leave. Slide number 8 shows my father's mother holding me, probably just as we're getting to leave for Minidoka. They lived in Portland, and they joined us in Minidoka for the duration. This is a picture of the family at Minidoka on our doorstep there. My uncle, Ted Nakashima, was also an architect. He was my father's younger brother, and he complained and published an article saying that what they did to us in Minidoka was not constitutional, so they whisked him off to the high-security camp in Tule Lake for causing trouble. And my mother's oldest sister, Thelma, is there in the middle of the picture, and there's my mother and me on the doorstep at Minidoka. In the right-hand photograph, my mother and me again with her father, Kinyo Kajima. And this is a photograph of my father's father in the adult education program. When I first saw this picture in the Minidoka yearbook, I thought they were teaching, but it turns out the U.S. government, in its wisdom, decided that the Issei in the community needed to be educated in the ways of America and our culture. So my grandfather is there in the middle row on the left-hand side. And we were sponsored by the Raymonds, who had left Japan by this time and come to Bucks County, and they invited us to Pennsylvania. My father was allowed to work as a chicken farmer, not as an architect when he was with Raymonds, but they got us out of camp in 1943. The rest of our family, most of them stayed in Minidoka till the end. My grandparents are visible here in this photograph just to the lower left of the water tower. My grandmother has a scarf on her head, and my grandfather is wearing a hat in the middle row. These are my father and Gentaro Hikogawa, who was a trained Japanese carpenter who worked alongside my father when we were in Minidoka, and they were given the task of trying to make our barracks more livable. Gentaro Hikogawa is shown in the right-hand photo cleaning a piece of bitter brush. As many of the incarcerees did, they would go out on the desert and collect bitter brush and then spend a lot of time cleaning it up and polishing it and making it into something beautiful. My father was the designer, so he's shown here with a blueprint, which he also papered the walls with to keep the wind out. These are some of the hand tools that we were allowed to use. We weren't allowed to have anything dangerous like photographs and power tools, probably, but we were allowed to have hand tools. So my father learned a lot from Gentaro Hikogawa about the use of Japanese hand tools and joinery, and he was very grateful for the experience of being incarcerated and being there with this trained Japanese carpenter who taught him a great deal. This is one of the projects that they did. They were tasked with making a model apartment, and they were given the task of trying to figure out how to use available materials to make our barracks more livable. Slide number 16 shows the Raymond Farm in Pennsylvania, which was our first home on the east coast of Pennsylvania. I'm there standing by the barn door with one of the farm hands, and I'm with my mother in front of the barn itself at Raymond Farm in about 1943. This is the table that my father built on the Raymond Farm, he built it in the milk house, which wasn't being used for milk anymore, and he set up a small workshop there. It's a table which he had basically designed already in Seattle, but he put it together when we were at Raymond Farm. So it was one of the pieces that went into my father's retrospective, his first and last retrospective in 1989, and the curator of the show said you have to name it something besides coffee table, and so he named it the Milk House Table. We are still making these in various sizes and shapes and woods to this day. So Dad always felt if you had a good design, it was good forever. You didn't have to change it every year. Slide number 18 is a picture of the little shop that my father was able to put together after we were released from the Raymond Farm in 1945. He found a little cottage down the road from where we are now and set up his shop in the workshop and in the garage. And the WRA came to take these photographs and showed my father working in his little shop, and they had me pose and had Dad teach me how to do some drilling on his bench. So I'm shown there learning how to use a hand drill. And this is another picture of my father patiently teaching me how to use a hammer and nail. This is the shop where we are now. He found a piece of property and was excited because it was a south-facing slope and he wanted to build on it. Didn't have any money to build, so he found the farmer who was an MIT grad and convinced him that he would work off 3 acres of land if he would let him camp on the land. So we camped in a tent for the first year or so of our lives there, and my father built the shop first because that was most important. And this one little room is where he did all his work. It was the office, it was a shop, it was a finishing room, and everything else. And I think it was a one-man shop at that point. And it gradually grew. This is a house that he eventually built, a living room that was finished first, where my mother and Dad and I lived till the rest of the house was finished. It's where my brother lives now. This is some of the details from the interior, which are made of bitterbrush. The left-hand cabinet has a bitterbrush handle, as does the right-hand cabinet. It has a larger piece of bitterbrush as its handle. The bitterbrush shows up again in the showroom, which was built in 1954. It's holding up a corner of this cabinet, and the building, which was built in later, is the Konoid Studio. We still have some pieces of bitterbrush that we keep as mementos of Minidoka, reminders of the time that we spent there. This is a precious piece of bitterbrush which I used to make a project for an exhibition with Wendy Maruyama, who's another Sansei Japanese woman woodworker, who was teaching at Penland, and they asked her to invite someone else to exhibit with her. So I knew she was doing a lot of work as a tribute to the incarceration, even though she herself was not incarcerated. So I made this lamp out of one of our precious pieces of bitterbrush, and the shade is designed by Isamu Noguchi, who was also incarcerated during the war. This is a picture of the entrance to the showroom. On the left-hand side, you can see the walkway going down to the house from the showroom. It's right next door with a dogwood blooming. And on the right-hand side is the main entrance to the showroom. On the upper left-hand corner, you can see the entrance to the showroom from the inside. There's flagstone on the inside as well as the outside. In the lower left-hand corner is a view of the south-facing glass wall and the window bench next to it. On the center of the showroom is a 3-mat tatami platform that we use for exhibiting furniture. This is a building which my father built in 1956, right after the showroom. It is the first set of warped shell roofs on the property. It's a hyperbolic paraboloid shell. It was new technology at the time, and my father was anxious to employ it on our property because it was a way to span a large area unsupported with very little material. The roof was very successful in 1956. We still use it for lumber to this day, and the roofs are still the original roofs, and they're still in excellent shape, so it was a good experiment. This is his most difficult experiment. It is the conoid studio where I do most of my work. It's a very thin shell of concrete. It's 2.5 inches thick, and it's held up on the south side by a large concrete arch and on the back side by Pennsylvania fieldstone wall. And basically what's in between is just a curtain wall. It's hanging and does not support any of the weight of the roof. This is a view of the conoid studio from the front. You can see that the entire wall is almost entirely glass, and the little room there in the front is cantilevered off the back wall. This is a pool house, a different kind of shell. It's a barrel vault shell made of plywood. It was built in 1960. My father also designed this pool with a cantilevered platform off of one side, which won a prize in 1960 for its different design. There is also a reinforced concrete cantilever off of the pool house itself. And this is a shot of the interior of the pool house with furniture that isn't normally there, but you can see that it faces south. It's completely open to the weather, so we're doing some work on it this year. This is the Arts Building, which was built in 1967 as a gallery for Ben Shawn, who designed this mosaic for this wall. He said, "George, you need a mosaic on that wall." He designed it, but unfortunately passed away 2 years after the building was open. So my father took the maquette to Chartres, France, and had it built, sent over in 8 parts, and installed in 1972. The central photograph is a shot across the little pond next to the Arts Building, and you can see the southern facade and the main entrance. On the right-hand side, you will see an interior cantilevered set of steps that go up to the partial second floor. This is the last building that my father built. It's called a reception house, or Sanso Villa. I think he thought that my mother and he would retire there in their later years, but my mother liked the old house better, which was right next door, and so she stayed there until the end of her life. So we use this for guests and for entertaining, and we use it for meetings because it has it has a lovely space inside. You can see the entryway has pretty fancy stones there that were imported from Japan in the entryway, and the table below it is called a Sanso table. It was basically the prototype for his later peace altars, but it's a very wonderful shape to eat around, to talk around, to meet around, just to be with. It makes a very democratic sort of meeting because there is no head of the table. Everybody is gathered together as equals. And this is the fireplace designed like a Franklin stove to heat the entire building, because this was built in 1975. And my father knew that we were going to run out of fossil fuels someday, so that he designed this building to be heated entirely by the fireplace in the center. This is a church, a reinforced concrete church with a hyperbolic paraboloid roof that my father designed and built in 1965. It has been in continuous use since that time, and it was actually my design school project, because I happened to be at Waseda University studying architecture at the same time. This is the interior, which has unfinished concrete walls, but it has furniture that was designed by my father and made in Japan. This is another chapel that he designed in the 1970s for the Benedictine community of Christ in the Desert in Abiquiu, outside of Santa Fe in New Mexico. And it's a beautiful site. There's the Father Aylred, who founded this monastery, had been a friend of Dad's since he did a project in Portsmouth Priory. And then he decided to leave and go to the southwest. And this is based on the indigenous architecture of the region. It's made of adobe that was actually made from the property and stones that were harvested from the property. But apparently it's one of the tallest towers built of adobe, and it's a clerestory window on 4 different sides, so that when the monks have their 8 services throughout the day, they can see the views of the weather and the canyon and the colors of the canyon and the path of the sun every time they're in that chapel. It's quite beautiful. This is another church that my father designed in Mexico this time. The same Father Aylred decided to open another monastery in Mexico. It's near San Miguel de Allende, and it's made of adobe, but it has a Guanajuato roof, which is native to that part of the land. And unfortunately, it's too small now for their community, but it was perfect for them when it was first built. This is back at the Nakashima property in New Hope. The building on the left is our pole barn, which we built in 1990 to house the lumber that my father had purchased and milled and needed a home to be stored in after he passed away. And we had nowhere else to store it, so we petitioned the zoning board to build this and with the understanding that it was a temporary structure, and that was 30 years ago. So it's still a temporary structure and still serves its purpose as housing our piles of lumber, which are important for us. And there are smaller pieces that we use for smaller tables, and the picture on the lower right-hand corner shows the piece of wood with our tools of the trade. There are 2 steel tapes and sketches and the power planer, which are essential to finding the right piece of wood for the right job. This is a picture of my husband, John Yarnell, several years ago. He's been working in the shop almost 40 years now, making chairs, and there are chair parts that are manufactured in batches, which are stored in the chair department, and there's a picture of the conoid chair in the lower right-hand corner. Slide number 41 is the finishing department. My father insisted we use only a rubbed oil finish, which is a very laborious process. You apply the coats of oil many, many times, sometimes 5 or 6, but it brings the wood to life, as you can see in this photograph. Matt is putting oil on this piece of wood, and the left-hand side is not oiled. You can see that it's pale and has no color. And the piece on the right has fresh oil, but you can see the grain and the color that comes out with a rubbed oil finish. This is one of the chairs that my father designed, the very earliest chairs that was commissioned by René Darnoncourt of the Museum of Modern Art in 1945. The chair was finally finished at 46 or 47, and the original is hanging or displayed somewhere at the Philadelphia Museum of Art because René gave his original chair to his daughter Anne, who was head of the Philadelphia Museum of Art for many years. We still make this chair exactly as my father did that long ago. We steam bend the backs by hand. We fit all the spindles and stretchers, and we weave the seats all by hand still. So we've actually had a large number of orders for this chair recently. And my father kept trying to discontinue it, but people still want them, so we still make them. This is a chair that was designed later in the 1960s. It's lower to the ground, called a lounge chair, and these have freeform arms, which are individually selected by clients when they come. This is the iconic conoid chair. It was criticized by a design critic who said that you can't possibly build a strong enough chair on two legs out of wood. You better take it off the market because it's going to break and, people will sue you up and down. We've had very few breakages with this chair, which has been in continuous production since 1960. We have almost no breakage with this as opposed to the four-legged chairs, which break fairly often. Not often, but sometimes. This is an example of the kind of joinery that my father learned when he was working with Gentaro Hikogawa in Minidoka. This is the butterfly joint, which holds a crack together. In the very beginning, he couldn't afford to buy really good lumber, so he got the rejects from the lumber industry, which often had so-called flaws. They had cracks and holes and things like this. And he would hold the cracks and holes together with butterflies if necessary. And he said in the beginning, people didn't understand what he was doing. But as time went on, people paid extra for the holes and cracks and butterflies. This is one of the tables he designed for a project in Frenchman's Cove, Jamaica in 1959. And we still make this design. The tabletops are all different, but it's a memory from that time. This is the conoid room divider. It's a cabinet which is finished on both sides. It has sliding doors on this side and a finished solid back on the other side, so that as in the conoid studio, you have a very large room. You can divide the space without actually cutting it with a wall. So it's kind of nice and airy and practical. This is another cabinet that can be used from both sides. It's from a later period of time. It's called the Bahu, and it's made with Clara walnut doors. This particular model is made with Clara walnut doors and an oak burl handle, and it's finished on the back with solid wood as well. This is a set of lamps. The one on the right was a floor lamp. It was designed originally for Kent Hall in New York at Columbia University. The one on the left is a smaller lamp, which we call a table lamp or desk lamp, and the bases are all made of remnants from our milling process. We usually go and personally mill our lumber from logs, and there are bits and pieces that are left over that would normally be discarded and burned, but my father would always gather up all the interesting pieces and take them home, and we use them for lamp bases. So we have quite a collection of lamp bases in the corner of the studio, which people can choose. These are the group of people that we are very grateful for to this day, from Sakura Seisakusho. They were a part of the Minguren group. It's called, Minguren translates as People's Tools Association, but it was a group of artisans who wanted to preserve the old folk craft traditions in Japan and adapt them to modern times. So Dad worked alongside them, and they've produced probably a dozen shows for us in Japan. This is from the 1970s, but we are still very good friends with them, and they still supply us with products that we can't get in the U.S. This is one of the series of Minguren tables, which my father designed from them for them and for their shows. There is a twin to this table, which is in New Hope, Pennsylvania, but its twin lives in Takamatsu, Japan. It's made from English oak burl. And these two are also part of the Mingren series, made of English oak burl. This is the Mingren 1 base, end table, and coffee table to the right. And the English oak burl was actually purchased by my father on a special trip he made to England. And he bought these logs at Mallinson's log yard, and he brought them home, and he was so happy. He says the Queen of England didn't know what she was doing. She should have sold her crown jewels and kept those logs, but I got them, and I'm taking them to the U.S. So he did. This is another example of the work that they do in Japan. This is grill work called asanoha, and it used to be used only in architecture, but my father thought it was so beautiful that it could be adapted to furniture, so he designed these two lamps. One is a smaller table lamp, and the other is a floor lamp. And then there's this cabinet, which also has the asanoha doors, which are made from Japan to this day. He was so impressed that this intricate grill work, where 12 pieces of wood come together in one spot, was so precise and so beautifully made, and made of such beautiful material that he wanted to use it in his furniture here in the U.S. Nowadays they have laser cutters, but in the old days they used to cut these joints all by hand. This is a picture of the interior of the Rockefeller home in Pocantico Hills. The architecture was designed by my father's good friend Junzo Yoshimura, who was with him in the Raymond office in the 30s. And Junzo asked my father to furnish the entire building. So the entire building at one point was furnished all in Nakashima furniture. He designed a lot of new things for this project, and one of which is the Green Rock Ottoman. And this is the Rockefellers' conoid bench with back. They loaned it to us for the Full Circle show in 1989, and subsequently decided to sell it. So it sold for a very large amount of money on the European market. This is an installation which is still at the Museum of Modern Art. It was installed in the mid-'80s, and they wanted to have a display area for Nakashima furniture, and my father said, no, it has to be used. So he designed this room to be used. They moved the table and the chairs to a different room, and it's now in the midst of the Japanese gallery, but it is still there, and it is still in full use. This is a detail from one of the desks made of zebra wood that my father designed for his last show called The Full Circle. It stayed on at the Mingei Museum in San Diego, so it's now there. It had some of the most numerous butterflies along this edge that I've ever seen on any piece of furniture. This is a persimmon wood picture frame, which was loaned by the Krosnick family to the Full Circle show. It houses two Benshaw prints, and it was one of two pieces which were not burned in their house in Princeton in 1989. This is the other piece, which was loaned to the museum for their show and was not burned in the fire. And when the Krosnicks rebuilt their house and then decided to move to Arizona, they sold this table at auction, and it holds, I believe, the record price for a Nakashima table. It was almost $1 million. And this is an installation that I did at the James A. Michener Museum in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, after my father died in 1993. It's a piece of Claro walnut burl from California, which my father had said designated in chalk, not for sale, so I decided it would be a fitting monument to my father. This is an installation I designed and made for Michael Gabellini for the Ultimo Boutique in San Francisco. It's the biggest bahut I think I've ever made, and the biggest set of display tables I've ever made. Unfortunately, because of fashion being the way it is, this beautiful installation is no longer there. and the furniture was sold at auction. This is another project I did with Michael Gabellini. It's installed in Hamburg, Germany, and as far as I know, it's still there. It was for a jewelry designer, and he wanted green rock ornaments made larger so that people could sit on them and try on their jewelry around this table. I think this is the longest shelf that I've ever made, and we had to ship it in 3 parts. This is a recent piece that I made for a show at the Modern Gallery in Philadelphia. We had these crazy maple burls that preserved all the root ends, and they don't make very good tabletops, but they made beautiful standing pieces. So I made this as a standing piece to be seen from the street side of the Modern Gallery, from the window, and then with a sofa on the other side, so that you could come in and sit on the sofa and use that as a back. This is a photograph of our friends in Ahmedabad at the National Institute of Design. They had a 50th anniversary celebration of their founding and also of my father's teaching there. And they invited us to come for the celebration. So my brother Kevin is there to the left, and I'm in the center, then my husband, and then Kosuke Nagami, who came all the way from Japan to be with us for the celebration. This is the first peace altar that my father made. Our logger had come in with this enormous log, and he said, "George, this is the most beautiful walnut log you'll ever see in your entire life. It's bigger, and it's the best quality of any walnut log I've ever seen." And this fellow had been harvesting logs for almost 50 years. So Dad thought, what am I going to do with this? And of course, he wanted a lot of money for it. So he had this dream that he would make peace altars for each of the continents of the world, where people of all faiths, of all nations, of all religions and races would be able to gather together in peace and discuss things, to meditate, to meet, just to meet in silence, to make offerings, to sing around it. It's like, it's the same shape as that table in the reception house. It has a very unifying feel to it. It's like a round table, but it's semi-round. It has, a lot of sort of ins and outs and irregularities. Each of these is going to be different, but he made the first one in 1989, and we installed it at the Cathedral of St. John. He made it in 1986. We installed it at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in 1986, and he wanted to send one to Russia. So we worked on sending one to Russia for a long time, and finally we made one in 1995 and had it consecrated at the 50th anniversary of the UN, and it was just a beautiful thing that there were people from all faiths and all religions and all countries who came to gather around this peace altar in 1995. And eventually the same table went to Moscow and was installed at the cathedral. This table was finally installed at the Academy of Arts in Moscow in 2001. Before it went there, it stopped at the Hague Appeal for Peace, which was an international gathering to commemorate the Hague Treaty, which was signed 100 years before that. And it became the centerpiece of the gathering. There were people from all faiths and all nations who gathered for this celebration. They would light candles and offer rose petals and origami cranes, and it was quite a beautiful thing to have that as the centerpiece of the Hague Appeal for Peace in 1999. This is the last peace altar that we made in 1996 that was finally installed at the Unity Pavilion in Oroville outside of Pondicherry in 2014, and I went with my family for the final installation in its final place. My husband John is there on the left, And my grandson, Toshi Yamagasu, is there in the front. He lit the candle, and my brother and I are standing behind him. His mother is behind with the long black hair, and my son, Ru Amagasu, is kneeling next to the table, right next to Toshi. So this is an international community that was founded by Mira Alfasa, the mother of the ashram, where my father built his very first building. So it seemed appropriate that it would go to this international community. They said they needed a unifying space and a unifying table to meet around and to pray around and to meditate around. So this is in full use every single day in India. We're very happy to have it there. This is a picture of our crew in New Hope, who have been, some of them have been with us for many, many years. Jerry in the red shirt in the bottom row on the ground floor level has been with us for 50 years, and he is a repository of so much knowledge. We are trying to learn as much as possible from him before he retires this year. My husband John is on the left there. My brother Kevin's on the top row next to my manager on one side and me on the other. And my son Ru is in the bottom row on the ground, who is no longer able to work with us because he had a car accident a few years back. But we are very grateful to all of these people. I have a design assistant. I have 2 design assistants right now, but this is my previous design assistant. And they are invaluable in keeping us going. These are plaques which we acquired for the property. My mother, before she passed away in 2004, gave one of the buildings to our Foundation for Peace. And because of that, we were qualified to apply for national landmark status, and we are also on the World Monument list. But in 2008, we were put on the Pennsylvania Historic List, and in 2014, we were put on the National Historic Landmark List. So if we ever open up again, we will be open to the public and have tours, but like you at Minidoka, we are not allowed to be open because of the coronavirus, and we hope that someday we will all be together again. Thank you very much.